Good evening, everyone. It's time to begin our study in the life of Christ. I'm in Luke chapter 9 to begin our study. If you want to open your Bibles there, Luke chapter 9, we're going to be starting with the Transfiguration in lesson 12, right around question 9 or so on page 34 in your lesson book. All right. Well, let's see if... Oh, was that too quiet? Too low? Okay, better turn me up a little bit back there. Is it getting any better as I continue to speak? Okay, it's gone up a little bit. All right. So like I said, catching up, now it's maybe a little too high. Catching up with the Transfiguration. We've talked about how there's been some ups and downs for Jesus and his disciples. Of course, Peter confessed that he knows it had been revealed to him from heaven above that Jesus was the Christ, that great confession. But then when Jesus begins to reveal to them what the Christ must do, suffer, he says, that'll never happen to you. And he's rebuked and called Satan by Jesus. And that kind of leads up to this event, a strategically placed event in the life of Christ, this transfiguration where his glory is revealed to a select few, Peter, James, and John, who seem to be this small group out of the 12 apostles who are given a few special things that they witness and are able to share with others later, as we'll see here in just a moment. Why did Peter, as they go up on the mountain, Jesus is transfigured, meaning his appearance changes, and they're able to see him in all of his glory. And who is it that appears with Jesus? Moses and Elijah. Representing what, would you say? Why those two? Isn't that logical? Moses, the lawgiver, Elijah, one of the preeminent prophets, one that was prophesied that was coming, right? And so that leads to a question from the disciples. And so it's interesting as they appear, of course, Peter, James, and John are observing this. Notice what it says in Luke chapter 9, verse 31, who appearing in glory were speaking of his departure, which he was about to accomplish at Jerusalem. Speaking about his departure. So Moses and Elijah, hundreds of years before Christ, are now speaking with the Messiah himself about his departure. That word there is an interesting choice of words. McGarvey noted that that's a strange choice of words for a death. It's a much broader meaning than that. In fact, the Greek word is the same as the word for Exodus. They were speaking to Jesus about his Exodus, which, of course, Moses knows much about the Exodus, and there's clearly a parallel between what Moses did in leading Israel out of Egypt and Jesus, who was going to depart from this life, but also lead an Exodus as people were able to be set free from sin. Yeah, Norm?
I couldn't help but think of this being kind of almost a homecoming for the three of them. You think about the fact that Elijah and Moses were in heaven with Jesus before Jesus came down. Some of these discussions may have even occurred. It's interesting that it seems like it's friendly and they know each other and all of that kind of a situation, which it gives me goosebumps.
It's a rare glimpse into that spiritual realm. Yeah, that there is life well after death. In the case of Moses, 1,400 years later, we see him. Elijah, about 700 years. And they had plenty to talk about. Dad, did your hand up?
Excuse me. The New King James uses the word decease.
Mm-hmm.
It is decease.
Right.
So that seems to indicate to me his death on the cross.
Right.
But yours says departure. So that sounded like going back to heaven. So I don't know.
Right. And so the point is the Greek word is Exodus. His which is the idea of a departure. And so deceased may not, we're more comfortable with deceased just meaning death. Maybe that had a broader meaning when they selected the use of that word. So yeah, it's all encompassing. We'll see another place, hopefully tonight, where it talks about his taking up. He was focused on his taking up. In fact, if you just flip a page, or at least in my Bible, flip a page, Luke 9:51. When the days were approaching for his ascension, he was determined to go to Jerusalem. Does anybody have a different word for ascension there in Luke 9:51? For his receiving up? Yeah, okay. Yeah, in the margin, mine says taking up. So that's, again, it's an all-encompassing word for everything he's about to endure, including death on the cross, resurrection 3 days later, and then, yes, he is received up into heaven, about 40 days after that, but uses that term comprehensively. That's why he was going to Jerusalem for that. Okay, so question 9 asks the question, why did Peter suggest 3 tabernacles? Francis? One for each, which kind of implies what about them? What was that? Equal, yeah, some equality. And that's what prompts a statement from heaven, right? God says, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I'm well pleased. Hear ye him." Peter, again, showing that impetuous nature, his just off-the-cuff thinking, perhaps. But the question was why? Why do you think he suggested that?
He said he didn't know what he was saying, so I'm sure he was awestruck and shocked.
Mm-hmm.
And then you add his impetuous nature, so he's just...
Right? Norm?
It's the awestruck is definitely part of it, but this strikes me every single time I read this, that Peter, who was alive centuries beyond Elijah and Moses, immediately knew who they were, having never seen them. But instantly decides, hey, this is such a great occasion. He already venerated Moses. He already venerated Elijah. And he's equating Jesus with his, I'm going to want to buy one for him, the absolute deserver, and you because you deserve it too. You're just like them. Which is why the immediate response, like it is, the words barely have left his mouth, the thoughts barely gone out of his brain, and that is immediately shut down with absolutely not. My son is greater.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective because in a sense, he's elevating the man who he walked up this mountain with to the level of Moses and Elijah. And yet the point is, no. He is the Son of God, and to raise them to the level of Son of God is too great a position. Not recognizing who it is that they're with.
And another thing that tickles me about this particular episode here is we've all been in the situation where there's the awkward pause, where there's nobody saying anything. And Peter's always shown this ability, quote, air quotes, to fill the gap with his hasty speech.
Something needs to be said. Yeah, that's a good time to put your foot in your mouth. Yeah, that's certainly the case. Well, one detail that I'd noticed for the first time perhaps was as they were leaving him that this idea pops into Peter's head. Verse 33, Luke 9:33. As these were leaving him, meaning Moses and Elijah are about to go on, that he suggests kind of making camp. No. It seems to be an attempt to retain them, keep them here just a little bit longer. Wants to hear some more from these two. And so these 3 tents, the word tabernacle carries with it a worship connotation to us because we study the tabernacle, but it simply means tent. And so his proposal wasn't necessarily 3 places for worship, as if we're going to worship you equally. It quite simply could just be they're on a mountain It's the end of the day, and they're going to need to make camp. So let's make tents for the three of you to keep them from leaving. Any other thoughts on the transfiguration here? What are they told as they come down the mountain? Yeah, it's more of this strategic control of information flow that Jesus is trying to do with his apostles. They are a lot more obedient than, say, the random man who's been healed, who often has a hard time containing himself. But not to share this until when? Till he had risen from the dead. And I can think of at least one place where we know that command was fulfilled. Peter, over in his letters, he references the transfiguration, very specifically describing this same event in writing 1st and 2nd Peter. So we know that they shared this account, and obviously we see evidence of it in these Gospels as they are written. All right, so he goes on, as they come down from the mountain, there's this occasion of the healing of the demoniac boy, the boy who had a demon. For sake of time, I don't think we'll spend any time on number 12. Just jumping down to number 14, what does Jesus then tell his disciples that caused them to be exceedingly sorrowful? That's right. He's going to be betrayed, put to death, and rise 3 days later. Okay, that's in both all three accounts, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. If you're still in Luke 9, it's verse 43 and verse 44. Notice how he says, "Let these words sink into your ears, for the Son of Man is going to be delivered into the hands of men." This is hard to get this concept through their skulls, and he wants them to understand it. It says, verse 45, "They did not understand this statement, and it was concealed from them so that they would not perceive it, and they were afraid to ask him about this statement." I think they should have asked him. I think he would have been happy to explain further. Norm?
I think that, and we do the same thing, that we are so set in a particular way of thinking. We keep marching down the same path, and even though people are like, "Leave 2x4 upside the head," to realize you need to lift your eyes up a little bit. And this is kind of the same thing, that they're just now grasping who he is, but they can't quite understand how big it is that they will grasp. Like Peter made the statement, he's opening his mouth too soon. Like he's already made confession of who and what this is, but they're not grasping the magnitude of their confession. So they don't have that understanding that they will get when the Holy Spirit comes, of who it is and what it is that they are actually participating in life with. And so here he is saying, this is going to happen, that's going to happen, and they are so focused on what they think it should be that they cannot comprehend the very words that are literally coming out of his mouth. This is going to happen. Like, there's no way that's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that can't happen. And they say it over and over and over again. Peter's like, very adamant, it's not going to happen. He's got to tell them, look, this is going to happen. And he goes right up and does it. And it's not until after he makes the denial that it hits him, what have I done?
Mm-hmm.
But he'd been multiple times that this is going to happen. And they are so focused on the physical of what they think he should be. And then here's this great man.
Mm-hmm.
He's the Son of God. They can't comprehend that either, and what that would mean.
Sure.
And so here we have this declaration, and they are just so blinded by their own incapability of grasping. What does the Son of God mean? We are blessed to have the whole story to look at. And
Sure.
it could be explained to us from
Hindsight.
the very beginning. He was power and might, and so we can see this. But from their perspective, like they're looking for a Messiah, a prophet, and they're thinking Moses, and Moses was a man.
Right.
And so to then equate this with, no, this is God in the flesh who made all things walking next to you. So it should not be a surprise to you that he can exist, and the wind and the waves are just going to do whatever he wills, whether he says something or not. And
Sure. And the death on the cross being something that he could easily overcome. And we see even in this lesson how he eludes their grasp when people are trying to kill him multiple times. So it's not that there's a difficulty that he can't overcome. It must be something he will submit to, which must have been hard to consider or to understand.
Like you already mentioned, these three seem to be so close to him through all this, and they were at odds with what's going to happen. Can you imagine? And a lot of people have, and nobody knows what Judas's thoughts were, that he was just going to get some money and nothing was going to happen to Jesus.
Yeah, it's a possibility.
And he saw, and he felt what he did, and everything changed.
Yeah, perhaps why he commits suicide, right?
But these three being the closest were confused. Can't imagine the rest of them. They're not mentioned, so we don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, you would, our feeble minds would think, well, when he finally dies on the cross, then they would immediately be looking forward to that third-day resurrection because he spelled that all out. And yet, even that is concealed. They're just so blinded by the fact of this terrible tragedy that he's been put to death and gone, and they don't want to lose him, that they miss that fact as well.
Even the admission of like Mary, like I know that you can raise the dead.
On the last day, yeah.
So even it's plain statements like they're speaking it themselves, but cannot comprehend what it is they're speaking. It doesn't click yet.
Sure.
Most of the world today has the same problem understanding it that these guys did. So we can't be too hard on them.
Sure.
I mean, you think about the people that think it's just ridiculous.
Yeah.
That somebody would even, God would come up and with this kind of a silly plan. Or Jesus must have failed the first time. So he's got to come back and do it again. I mean, this is.
Yeah. The plan of a suffering Messiah, one who dies in place of others, is certainly a lofty concept, one that we are constantly impressed by. Moving forward to the tribute money. What tax was Jesus asked to pay? Your question 16. The temple tax. And so this was a requirement of every male, as I understand, every year. And they were, of course, always looking for an opportunity to trap him. Is this man going to pay the tax? Where was it that Jesus gets the money to pay that tax? From a fish. Yeah, it's a different story than the render Caesar unto Caesar account, right, where they talk about taxes there as well. Here, the question that I think is a good one here, did he have to pay it?
Really didn't have to, but he didn't have to offend them.
Right. Good answer, Shirley. He didn't have to. He didn't want to offend them, right? As a man, every man in the kingdom was required to pay it. But was he simply a man? That's the lesson that he wants to teach, and he does teach. He asks Simon Peter about kings and what prince pays the tax for his father's kingdom. No, it's the citizens of the kingdom that pay those taxes, and it keeps food and everything else on the prince's table. And so, no, he is in a position where he could easily decline this requirement. He is God, and he is about to come to his temple, that temple that is for himself. And so he does not have to pay it, but so as to not cause anyone to stumble. Like he says, verse 27 of Matthew 17, so that we do not offend them, go to the sea and throw in a hook. And they get enough for Jesus and Peter. Which shows, again, who Jesus is. It's not just that the citizens of Israel are bringing this tribute to the temple, but all creation, down to the fishes in the sea, are ready to bring tribute to the Son of God because he's the ruler of all. Was there a comment on that, Norm?
It just
Okay,
He had no sin, had nothing to do with
ah,
that.
okay.
The same kind of thing. But
To
in
fulfill all
order that
righteousness.
All things might be fulfilled, and he's saying, and in this case, that so that people cannot say anything bad against me
Mm-hmm.
for this, I'm gonna do it. But it's not something I earned, it's right here.
Sure.
My creation.
He can argue, like you will in John 8, which one of you convicts me of sin? No one can say he's committed a sin, although there's other things that he's brazenly doing, like healing on the Sabbath, that they will accuse him of sin for, which we know that he was not breaking the Sabbath. He was showing what the Sabbath should be. All right, and so an interesting question comes up, number 19. What were Jesus' disciples discussing among themselves while in the way to Capernaum? So this is where we see the first who is the greatest conversation. I don't think it's the last. So as we study, we'll see how many times this might come up. You know, what might have prompted this discussion that we've just recently studied through? There were a few who'd been kind of selected even out of the 12, right? Yeah, Peter, James, and John. What about before that? Had Peter been singled out? Yeah, he said, I'm going to give you the keys to the kingdom. You know, blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah. And so there seems to be some kind of special position. You know, one might argue, well, I think Peter's going to be the greatest. Or maybe James and John, because they were included in this special group. So you can see why this might arise. And so Jesus then has a very important lesson that they need to learn. What does he use to teach them that lesson? A child. He takes the child and sets him in their midst so they can take a look at that visual aid. This? Like a child. In what way do you think he's referring to? Innocent. Okay. The innocence comes through the blood of Christ. Humility. He's teaching a lesson on humility, greatness. Whoever once would be first should become last. Whoever would become great should become the servant of all. And so the humility of a child who the thought wouldn't cross his mind to be greater than all the adults in the room. He's clearly so much smaller than everybody else. And so there's a natural humility, a reliance on the others. And so he wants to see that kind of heart in his disciples as well. Any other thoughts on that one? Question 22, how did Jesus emphasize, I don't think I circled this one, how did Jesus emphasize the seriousness of causing a child to stumble?
Millstones tied around his neck and thrown in the depths of the sea.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. There's also an interesting statement there made a little later, Matthew 18 and verse 10. See that you do not despise one of these little ones, for I say to you that their angels in heaven continually see the face of my Father who is in heaven. From this one statement, you get a theology that grows about guardian angels. You may have heard people reference guardian angels. That term is not in our Bibles, but here you do have their angels. And so there is, a suggestion here that we don't know what all the heavenly host is assigned to do. But we know there's myriads upon myriads of servants of God up in heaven. And here it says these little ones have angels. And those angels have a special place where they are in the presence of God every moment. And so I wrote down a comment from McGarvey. He said, that those angels are entrusted with the care of certain individuals. That's all we can say. And those angels being in the presence of God are supplementing their own wisdom and power with that direct access to the presence of God, whatever that may bring. What a beautiful thought to think that there are angels assigned to the care of these little ones and to all. Any thoughts or questions on that, Francis?
Sometimes I can look at a child, and that smile and that twinkle in their eyes when they're looking, you're wondering, what are they thinking? And I could very well imagine there's an angel in there looking, because you don't know. Nobody knows what that child's thinking. I don't know what I was thinking at that age, so, you know, but they had the purest outlook, innocent and just amazement. They seem to be bubbly and happy, and you don't know why, but you
Sure.
can look at them and they're looking at you that way.
Yeah, and imagine the contrast he's showing here, that somebody wants to be the greatest. I'm trying to lord it over these other men and be the head honcho. And yet, what are you going to do? You're going to totally overlook and ignore all the children around your feet, right? You've obviously got those guys beat, right? You're already dominant over them without any effort. And yet, those who would become great should become the servant of the least. You know, if you, as much as you did it for the least of these, you did it unto me. That's what Jesus taught. And so, causing a little one to stumble should be, something we dread above all things. But our focus then should be on, how can I help this little one to succeed? How can I help them to grow? Guide them in the way that's right. Focus my life on helping them to reach heaven. All right, as we finish lesson 12, I wanted to touch on question 25. What is the Christian's duty toward his brother who has wronged him? And this is a text we sometimes recall being in Matthew 18, because sometimes we'll say, well, the Matthew 18 process is this or that. So what is a Christian's duty? Dad?
Well, the first step is to go to him and try to talk with him and straighten out whatever it is between you and him. And then
Yes.
If he won't hear you, then it says to take witnesses. So
Okay.
that they can establish what was said. And then if that doesn't work, take it before the church.
Okay.
It's interesting to me that the church is mentioned here when it hasn't been established yet.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? And I wanted to talk about that. It's the second time we've seen the word church, because in Matthew 16, he said he would build it, right? I will build my church. I may be the only two. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think those may be the only two places in the Gospels where he's speaking of the church. Now, by the time Matthew writes his Gospel, McGarvey pointed out, the church had been established. So there were certainly those who were ready to apply this when they were reading it. But it certainly does look forward to the church that Christ was going to build. It implies what about Christians? They're going to be in churches, which means assembly. They're going to, so the concept of Christians being in local churches that you can go tell it to and that they can all withdraw from a brother, that model was planned from the beginning. What does it also show about the teachings of Christ before the cross? Some have suggested that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John belong in the Old Testament. How would you answer that? No?
Time frame-wise, you're correct. However,
Yeah.
when the king comes down and makes a statement, it doesn't matter what time it is.
What is a testament?
It's like a will, last will and testament.
Yeah, over in Hebrews, it gives us that use of the word testament, will, also covenant. So we could call this Old Covenant, New Covenant. Are the words of Jesus Old Covenant? No. Not at all. This is the instruction of Christ about his kingdom, for his kingdom. And so he's here teaching them what they should do in the church. So we've got to be very cautious about anybody who takes a position that, well, here's a teaching of Jesus that I don't have to obey because that was before the church began. No, he's teaching about his church. And this is one place we can see that pretty clearly. All right. Any other questions about that one? He talks about the binding and loosing in the next few verses. Verse 18, if you're in Matthew 18, whatever you bind on earth shall have been bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall have been loosed in heaven. In context, what's he referring to? That they're binding and that they're loosing. What's he just got done talking about?
Is it their soul?
Was talking about this brother who refused to repent. And what did they have to do after he wouldn't hear the church? Yeah, let him be unto you as a Gentile and a tax collector. You withdraw from him. You deliver such a one to Satan, like it says in 1 Corinthians 5. And so he's no longer a part. You've removed him from your midst. And that's binding, right? Even over in 1 Corinthians 5, Paul is talking to a church and he's not physically there. And he's saying, you do it with my authority and with the authority of Jesus. You withdraw from this brother. And so it's the same idea here. You're binding it, and God's going to recognize it because you followed God's process, and it's bound in heaven as well. And then loosing, if that brother repents, what do? You receive him back. And that loosing is accepted in heaven as well as we follow his will. And so then in context, you have this statement about 2 or 3. Question 26, what did Jesus say would happen when 2 or 3 gather in his name? Yeah, he's there in their midst. If 2 of you agree on earth about anything they may ask, it shall be done for them by my Father who is in heaven. Verse 19. For where 2 or 3 have gathered. Where didn't he mention 2 or 3? Earlier? What were the 2 or 3 for? Witnesses. That's how facts and truth are established. It's been all the way back to the old law that you need at least, you don't accept a testimony on just one witness. So, but 2 or 3 are now saying the same thing, so it should be accepted as truth. And when you make a determination that a brother needs to be removed from your midst, that is God with you? He is. He says it'll be bound in heaven, and he's there in your midst. So that's the context. Sometimes we take that statement out of its context and suggest that anytime 2 or 3 people are together, that they are a church. Can 2 or 3 people form a church? Absolutely, yeah. You can have an assembly with only 2. I've worshiped with a few congregations that are only 2. But they know they're a congregation, and they invite us back the next week. They'd love to have us back. But that doesn't mean anytime I'm out to dinner with another Christian that we're a church, right? And we should be careful not to teach that just from this passage, which in its context is talking about the withdrawal against another. Any thoughts or questions on that?
I guess it's the intent of your being together. If you're just out to eat dinner, like you said, that's not a church. But if you're together to study and to worship God, that could be a church.
I suppose 2 or 3 gather together to worship, even at home, maybe, or to study our Bibles at home for this upcoming study on the coming Lord's Day. But a church that has a number, right? There's knowledge of membership and those who are either a part of your number or not, like we see elsewhere in the Scriptures. That requires some sort of an understanding, right, that there is a church or there is not. I don't see that here in this text. Randy.
The word church doesn't mean necessarily a local congregation. Paul, in all of his letters, described what a local church did and the responsibilities and the work that they had to do. And just because 3 people are together and they worship God doesn't make them a local congregation. If it did, then they would be discussing about the contribution and what to do with that. So, how to spread the gospel, and so it would be the local church is more defined than just 2 or 3 people gathering together.
Right.
And I know we make this point quite often, but people use this passage that we just got through talking about when they go on vacation, to say that we're gonna pull over on the side of the road and partake of the Lord's Supper.
Mhm.
And nowhere in the scripture does God give us authority to take the Lord's Supper unless in the local church, a church that has organization and purpose set forth, among the members to do that.
Yeah, I think that's a very important application. Paul was able to write his letter to the church at Corinth, not 5, 6, 10 letters to all these Christians who might be gathered in various places on a random day in Corinth. And while he's writing that letter, he says, when you come together as a church, in chapter 11, talking there about the Lord's Supper. So we take the Lord's Supper when we're gathered together as a church. Any other thoughts or comments on that? All right. Lesson 13, he now moves to this text about in Jerusalem for the Feast of Tabernacles. We're primarily in John for this lesson, but there's a bit here in Luke that McGarvey ties together into the chronology. So I just want to glance at that Luke text before moving over to John, Luke 9:51. What was the attitude of Jesus' physical brethren towards him at this time?
Skepticism.
There's skepticism, yes. It's also more specifically called unbelief by Jesus. You see that over in John 7. If you're there as well, maybe hold your place in both texts. John chapter 7. They suggest John 7 and verse 3. Therefore his brothers say to him, "Leave here, go into Judea, so that your disciples also may see your works which you are doing. For no one does anything in secret when he himself seeks to be known publicly. If you do these things, show yourself to the world." So not even his brothers were believing in him. That was the attitude. He was, as we know, we've been observing how he withdrew into Galilee. Even within Galilee, he's withdrawn into Tyre and Sidon and some of the surrounding regions. Not always wanting to be with the large crowds. Some of the large crowds have gone away from him by this point. But now there's this Feast of Tabernacles, also called the Feast of Booths. If you remember from our Old Testament studies, about what time of year would that have been?
First harvest.
It's the final harvest. Yeah, so this is the end of their growing season, the third of the 3 feasts. So in that September-October time frame, same month as the Day of Atonement, and so they have this week where they are, it was, McGarvey noted, one of the most festive, exciting, I guess, enjoyable feasts of the Jews. He said it would kind of have that feel of a picnic, right? Because everybody's building these booths outside, spending the week outside, and sharing in these feasts every day for the week. And so Jesus has been staying away from Jerusalem. He's, concerned about the timeline. That's how he answers his brothers. John 7 and verse 6, "My time is not yet here, but your time is always opportune." What was the statement? Question 2, what reason did Jesus give for the fact that the world hates him?
Because he exposes its evil.
That's right. Because he testifies of it that its works are evil. We've seen that pretty plainly with those who would oppose Jesus, that they're constantly put to shame and shown to be selfish or hypocritical, and it frustrates them and ratchets up the issue with their desire to put him to death. Over in Luke chapter 9, the text that he combines with this time period is Luke 9:51 through 56. If you just glance there, it says, "When the days were approaching for his ascension," like we read earlier, "he was determined to go to Jerusalem. And he sent messengers on ahead of him And they went and entered a village of the Samaritans to make arrangements for him, but they did not receive him because he was traveling toward Jerusalem. So he doesn't go the route that was typically taken. They call it the Perean route, where if you're in Galilee, you cross the Jordan, go down that eastern side of the Jordan, and then cross back into Judah to avoid the land of Samaria. There was this much enmity between the Israelites and the Samaritans that even the Samaritans didn't want to take a traveler in who was going to Jerusalem. You don't come through our land to go to Jerusalem. That's kind of shows you why the Jews might have hated them. And that we know Jesus didn't ever show that hatred toward them. And what was James and John's response? Should we call down a lightning strike? Should we command fire from heaven? It doesn't connect this statement to their nickname, but what is their nickname? Sons of Thunder. There may be a connection there. That this is the attitude, and that those two disciples who we're getting to know pretty well from the number of times they're specifically mentioned, that they want to destroy these people. And Jesus rebukes them. And so that's not at all why he came. He was expecting to be rejected in various ways in this life, and it wasn't so that he could now destroy everyone who rejected him. He was here to save. And we know the gospel does quite well in Samaria later on. And many Samaritans, of course, have been exposed to Jesus through the woman at the well and other instances. And so he's going to have many disciples coming from this area. But he sets his face toward Jerusalem, Luke 9:51. That's if we're in September, October, we're right at about 6 months. And McGarvey pointed out that calendar. You're 6 months from a Passover when you're at the Feast of Booths. And so you're 6 months from the next Passover, which is when we know he's going to be put to death. And so as we observe his actions at the feast, just recognize it's that last feast. You're now going to go into the winter months before coming back in the spring, and that's when he's going to be put to death. So as he goes to the feast, we see quite there's a lot of conflict that he encounters there back in John chapter 7. What was the response of Jesus? Oh, let's see. I was wanting to spend some time on that, but our time's up. I'll decide where we want to pick up next week with question 4, or maybe a little bit after that. Thanks, everyone.